Thank you, Josh. So, good morning, good evening to everybody who's joining from all parts of the world. My name is Surabhi Kaushik. I am a short story writer, a poet, and a literary artist. A literary artist means I put programs like this together, which is supporting both authors and writers, giving authors a platform to share their knowledge and writers a chance to learn or just listen to their stories, which I find always inspiring personally. So, my guest today is Anuja Ghimire. And I'm going to just read out her introduction. Anuja Ghimire is an author of 4 poetry books, 2 in Nepali, titled Ankur and Arthaat, and 2 in English, Kathmandu and Fable-weavers. Her poems, stories, essays have been anthologized and nominated for Best of the Net and Pushcart prizes, published in Nepal, India, Bangladesh, the United States, Canada, the UK, Scotland, and Australia. She is a senior editor in an e-learning company, associate editor for the poetry journal Up the Staircase Quarterly, newsletter editor for the Nepalese American Chamber of Commerce, and a judge for the annual essay writing contest for school children in DFW, organized by the Nepalese Buddhist Association. She loves conducting creative writing workshops for children in summer camps. Thank you, Anuja, for making the time to be with us today. Welcome, and it's over to you.
Thank you, Sudha. Thank you, Surabhi. I'm so glad to be here today because I did not imagine my journey as a little girl who always wanted to be right, that a few years later, I'm not revealing my age, I will be in front of a computer talking to people all over the world, telling about my writing journey. And it's just an honor, and I want to acknowledge that. Anyone who knows me will tell you that I have a story about anything and everything. So I'll tell you a story about me. In 19th century, before Nepali became the official language of Nepal, Bhanubhakta Acharya, a poet, translated the epic Ramayana from Sanskrit to Nepali, and thus began Nepali language officially. He was known as the first poet. And a few years later, or a couple centuries later, I was born on his birthday. And when my mother was carrying me in her womb, my father was working at a press. I would like to take those two things as a sign that I was meant to be a poet and a writer. And my writing journey in Nepal was very different from how it is now or how it has been. Success came really easily to me. I started writing at a really young age. I remember my first story I wrote as the age of 5. I wrote a story about a child who uses magic to find her mother. And since Bhanubhakta's birthday is celebrated as a poetry day, I participated in all the poetry writing contests and won so many of them. And as a teenager, I published 2 books in Nepal, Ankur at age 15 and Arthaat at age 17. So I thought, wow, this is easy. You just work hard and it happens. And I was very, very fortunate. I realize now how fortunate I was that my father and my Nepali teacher took me to the great living writers, critics, songwriters, essayists who were living in Kathmandu for mentorship and to learn from them for advice. And I learned a lot from them. But I had this strong desire to write in English because I had fallen in love with all the books translated into English. I had my little brother and his friends become members of British Council because I could only get 2 books at a time to read. So I would get a lot of books from them and I would read. And someday I wanted to publish books in English or have my books translated in English or translate them into English myself. And here we are. I have 2 books in English, Kathmandu and Fable-weavers, published in America. But that journey has not been easy. So as I was leaving for America, one of my really good friends asked me, why do you want to go be a small fish in a big pond when you could be a big fish in a small pond in Nepal. And I told her that I just really wanted to write in English and have my books in the library, as I do. Thanks to Surabhi, it is in the library there. um, so when I came to America, I signed up for a advanced poetry workshop on accident. I should have signed up for just a poetry workshop. I wrote my first poem in English in America. I had been writing in English all my life, and I felt pretty good about it. And when I read the poem out loud in the workshop, there was stunning silence. And I thought, I knew I was kind of good, but I didn't know I was that good that I stunned everybody. Turns out nobody had understood my words because of my thick accent. The poem was titled Echo, and I read Eco. So they were all confused. When my professor read the poem out loud, then I started getting reactions, and I understood. In order to master this new tongue, I have a lot of work to do. And throughout, I'll be talking about representing culture through writing. And I want to say that these are my experiences. I will be talking about things that have worked for me as a writer. Feel free to use what you find useful and discard what may not work for you. And this is my story and my writing journey, and I'm really excited to talk about it. So a few years later in graduate school, I wrote a sonnet about Radha and Krishna. I was really excited using this new form of writing. I had written in meter, ghazal, and all the Eastern forms of writing, but this was my first time writing a sonnet. And as I was telling you how I was inspired by my family and my teachers and all the mentors, this professor challenged me. He said that nobody would do the work to understand all the cultural references that you have mentioned in this poem. And he rejected my poem. So many writers will tell you that two things inspire a writer: words of inspiration and spite. I wanted to show him that I can and I will write about my culture, and that I will enjoy doing that. So I worked really, really, really hard. And also, when I was in Nebraska, I came across a book, only one book about Nepal, and that only highlighted all the bad things like witches and witchcraft and all bad practices. There was nothing good about Nepal written in that book. So I felt like it was my duty to write about my culture, my people, in all the lights, not only the bad things that somebody found in my country, but all the wonderful, good, beautiful things, the universal things. So at the beginning, I felt the responsibility was too great, that I had to represent this whole entity of my culture and my people. And I wish somebody had told me then that you don't have to take this exciting thing as a banner, as a sign that you are advertising. It just has to be your story. Because even though everybody will not understand what is monsoon and marigold and sari and saffron, they will get the references. Somebody who doesn't know monsoon knows long spells of rain. Somebody who doesn't know marigolds knows roses. They will understand the nuances or the feelings. And I understood that you just have to tell your story well. It has to be meaningful. It has to have the ability to transfer the feeling from the writer to the reader. And somebody who really wants to know all the references can do the research, but they don't have to understand everything. So in Kathmandu, I have a poem in which I was able to use Devanagari, ka, ka, ga, ga, nga. And someone who read this book sent me a message on Twitter saying that reading Devanagari Lipi in a book made her want to be a writer when she grew up. So I felt like even if I retire from writing in 2020, because I'm still writing, because that happened in 2020, I felt like I succeeded in what I wanted to do. I didn't try too hard. I only wanted to tell a story that was true about a woman who was mocked for her accent when she was just minding her own business. And in that process, she sympathized with the hurt that the person who was mocking her was experiencing. Sometimes bullies only want to be loved and want attention. So my writing did not just come from my blood and wounds, but also from the joy of being from a land of beauty. Nepal is probably one of the most beautiful places in the world. It is just so exciting to just have grown up there. The sky was small in Kathmandu because it's surrounded by mountains. And when I came to Nebraska, I didn't realize that skies can be big too. Like you can see from one end to the other. So all these cultural differences that I explored in my writing, not only related to Nepali people, but also to any Western reader, and that to me was a success. When I became a better writer, my story became more natural. When I stopped thinking consciously about representation, because let's face it, I can't help but do it. Every story I write is about my culture because I am here. Every room I have been to, there is hardly any Nepali writer. Even in a group of South Asian writers, there are no Nepali writers. So by just being there, I'm representing my culture. And there is room for every story and every storyteller. You don't have to take over the burden of representing an entire identity. I take my words with sincerity and honesty and appreciate the honor and the privilege to tell my story. So, like I said, how my journey of writing was very easy as a young Nepali kid. And when I moved across 7 seas to come to America, I realized that it is not easy. As a working mother, it was even more difficult. But I keep writing because there is a fire in me and a desire to live twice through writing, once through life and once through observation of what the world is. And it is my first love, and I always find time for it. Because even through sickness, through children's various activities, through being a working mom, I find the time to write because I can't help it. I follow poetry journals and poets I resonate with me in social media, and I keep track of submission calls. I use a spreadsheet to stay organized because I have little time and I have to make the most of it. Two things that really work for me in getting published is I started consciously not writing about navel gazing, not looking within, but looking outside. When I started to write consciously about response poems, responding to my culture, responding to the world, responding to being in America, responding to the news, responding to things that really mean a lot to me, like gun violence and sending my children to school in America. And defying the idea that motherhood poems are also important poems, because there is still an understanding that motherhood poems are somehow like lesser of poems than other poems, that I can't help but write those because I am that. And when I started writing outside of me, but keeping the fire even more alive, I started getting more published. In getting my chapbooks published, Kathmandu faced a lot of rejections, but I kept at it. I found success in presses that published writers I liked, whose style I also liked, and whose writing I resonated with, whose style and flavor were kind of similar to mine, even though I'm writing about something totally different. And I read books about how to put collections of poems together. And I'm really thankful, like I said, to have in most of the poems in Kathmandu, I have mentioned the Nepali dates because we have a different calendar. It's 2018 in Nepal right now. So I'm writing about the royal family massacre, which changed my life and the way I think about the world. And it is all in this poem that Even though you may not know about the royal family massacre, the poem will tell you what it felt like to be a teenager living through that. And you can, if you're interested, look up the references to understand the poem better, but you don't have to. Just the feeling in the poem should be enough, I hope. So I want to talk a little bit about things I want to tell a poet who is starting out, who thinks as me that they will die if they're not writing and want to be a writer. Things that really worked for me was building writer friends. I'm very fortunate that starting from my teenage years in Nepal, I have a writer friend who lives in Canada now, and she's my first reader. I send everything I write, the first draft, to her. She has read my work for decades now, and I do the same for her. We have different styles of writing and sometimes different genres, but we read everything. And I trust her, and she trusts me. And I know what I'm trying to translate onto a page hasn't worked if it doesn't land with her. If she's confused about a line, then I know that it's not working. So it's really important to have a reader who can read your work and tell you if something is confusing or if you want to maybe revise it later. So exchanging my writing to a trusted reader and offering feedback in return has really worked for me. Another thing that has really worked for me is volunteering to read for a poetry journal, where now I'm the associate editor after a few years of wonderful experiences. I was able to understand how sometimes it's just subjective. Sometimes a poet has already sent a poem similar to what you have written and it has already been accepted. To not take it personally. Sometimes a poem that you think is already polished is not polished enough. And to understand that the sheer volume of writing is so much. There are a lot of us writing and sending poems, so we might not always be accepted in our dream journal right away. Something that has also worked for me is reading poems that are very different to my style. I write poems that I think are accessible, that are not very cerebral, and I don't really write in forms, although I enjoy ghazals and sonnets. I don't really write. My first love is free verse and narrative poetry because I really, as I've said throughout, like storytelling. And I do that through my poems as well. And I want to encourage poets starting out to read many contemporary living authors, not just the canons fed to you. Read authors from different backgrounds, somebody who's so different from you. And as much as poets introduced to you by the institutions. This is all that I had prepared to talk about. I am happy to take any questions about anything that you might want to ask me. Thank you, Sarah, for your question. So
Again, sorry, I was muted and I could not unmute. We do a group picture before we go into the Q&A. I was struggling because I was muted. So if you're able and comfortable to turn on your cameras, please turn them on, and Josh will give us a count before we click the group picture, and then we can go into the Q&A. Sorry about that, guys. Yeah, Josh, we're waiting for you to tell us.
Okay. So 1, 2, 3. All right, let me do one more just in case. 1, 2, 3.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, Josh. And thank you, Anuja. There was so much that I could relate to. I mean, I also write about India, I write about culture. I get really upset when there are misconceptions, and I could relate to a lot of parts of writing about your culture and not thinking about who's going to understand it or not. I mean, you just do it because you want to do it. You can't help it. I feel, I mean, I could relate so well to that. So now I'm going to let you answer the question and answers. And participants, you will not be able to unmute, but please put them in the chat and she will respond to all of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, for your question. I think that poetry, the taste in poetry is really subjective. And there are so many poetry journals out there. I would recommend like all of them, but especially I go by the masthead, and if it is very diverse, and that means that there's room for representing every writer, and I go for that. And I like small indie presses and journals more than really established journals, because I feel like poets who do not have a voice and are afraid to reach for the big names get published there. Again, I want to emphasize that these are my views and what works for me, and I'm not advocating or promoting anything over another. But the first journal that really published me was Glass, a Journal of Poetry, and it will always be my first love. I published a poem called Saffron, and it remains one of my favorite poems that I ever wrote. I would recommend that. The journal that I edit for Up the Staircase Poetry, and so many wonderful journals out there. Depends on your style of reading. For Kathleen's question, you are very right. There are sometimes a word that does not translate into English what you're trying to say in Nepali all of the time. For example, I remember, again, I'm going to storytelling. I was walking down the stairs in my college and I thought, if I fall in love with someone who does not speak Nepali, how would I really tell them what love is? Because love, Maya, which also means a kind of illusion in Nepali and Sanskrit, will not mean the same in English. So there are so many words that will mean different in English and in Nepali. And like somebody said, that translating is like kissing a photograph but not kissing a person. It will be like that. But I accept it, and I hope that the feeling that I'm trying to transfer will transfer regardless. Thank you for your question. Rejection sometimes feels more personal than others, but starting out, because my writing journey was different, I wasn't used to rejection. It was harder on me when I started getting rejections. It felt like for 100 tries, I would get one acceptance. And later on, you start getting solicitations. So you just have to go through the journey and know that it's not personal. And I try to edit, revise, and submit the rejected work and look at it a few weeks later to see what I may have missed, what may have caused the rejection. If I really believe that this was the right home for the right poem, then I think about it more and try again. There are so many publishers out there right now, and I can't even pick favorites, but I do find that if you want to do experimental writing and publish something that has not been published before, like for example, I did not think that I would be using Nepali dates, Nepali words, Nepali writing, and still get published and get royalty for my books. And I like to tell the story that my non-writer friends like. Here I am back with another story. First, with my first set of royalty money from Kathmandu, I bought an Instant Pot. and I make rice from it every dinner. It feels like poetry rice to me. And so I would, it really inspires me to keep writing. Uh, I like to remind myself that I can still do it. When I get rejections, I eat my poetry rice and feel like I can do that again. So find um, writing that resonates with your kind of writing and presses that publish that kind of poets that you'll have a better chance of being published. Thank you for your kind words, Vidya. Oh, yes. Thank you for posting that poem. I just really love that poem because I wrote that after I watched a classical Indian dancer in Houston, and I'm trained in classical Indian dancing, and her movements really inspired me to write that poem. So, one thing I really want to talk about is, like I talked about, living twice in poems. So I'm always reliving that moment when this dancer was dancing and I felt like so far from home, but also somewhere close to home when I was watching her doing something I also love. And now to have this poem in this uh, Zoom chat, which I never would have thought about as a 5-year-old, this is just amazing. Thank you for the website for the journal where I edit poetry. I'm reading Mitra's chat now. Okay. So I agree with you that there are so many poems about coming of age, and I feel like sometimes experiences happen now, but you write about them much later. For example, I'm still writing about the little girl in Nepal, even though I have 2 little girls. And sometimes poets coming of age because it's seminal experience. So maybe poets are writing about that and they will write about other experiences much later. There's room for all experiences. And I would not advise to change your style of writing because I didn't. I found the right home for my stories later. The more true your story is, the more specific and really true it is, the more universal it becomes. Because I have written about coming of age and I have gotten published. And I've written about being a mom worried about gun violence and I've been published. So it just has to be a true and honest and earnest story in which the feelings that you are trying to transfer to the reader happens. Oh, thank you, Jesse. I would actually love to read that poem out loud. And my friend Tina is here, and I want to thank her. And she has heard me read this poem many times. So, so here you go, Tina. I'll read it again. Let me find the poem. It was in a chat here. Okay. I flutter when I dance and shiver when I drive. My fingers create lotus, deer, and Shiva. How far is Houston from Victoria City? Prayers of my palm, poetry in my eyes. The sky is so big, the roads are so wide. I don't melt here. You're my saffron, your orange. When I push carts and displace cans from shelves, I ache, I stomp. My fingers create the rain and reach for the milk. When I'm not watched, I make art in Walmart. Thank you.
So I have a question. We were talking about, I mean, just before we started the meeting, we were talking about presses, the kind of indie press and small press. So there are a lot of people who want to get published here. I know some already are, but they might have more work and looking for places to take them to. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
About the process of getting
Indie
published?
presses, yes, the process of getting published, the difference between a small press and indie press. There's a lot out there.
So Let me first say that I'm really glad to be in this stage of life where I can be taking these questions. It feels like an honor to me. I have always gone for indie presses because I could take more risk of. I wanted to exactly write the book that I'm writing because I didn't get a chance to read those books. And I wanted to be published in indie book presses because they I felt like take more chances. But right now there are so many presses doing wonderful things, and my limited experience has been, like I mentioned before, like read more than you write. And when you read different poets, you will find one that really writes kind of like your kind of writing. Their style may be similar. And that's why I want there to be more Nepali writers, so they can feel like I want to publish like her, and or him or them. So what has worked for me is the royalty might be different. And for example, for fable-weavers, I get copies. I get a lot of copies, but I don't get royalty. For Kathmandu, I get royalty as well as some copies. And they will send books for different presses or journals for reviews. And I would recommend building a publication history. That has been the first for me. You have to have, because some presses require that a portion of the poems are already published before the whole book is accepted. So you have to do a little bit of research. For some, it might be 50-50, that 50% of the poems can be published, but not all of them. For some presses, it can be chapbooks can have been published, but not the. You can turn several chapbooks into a full length as well. I've seen that happen. And so it cannot be like the entire set of poems cannot have been published. So it depends on the press and what you want to do with your journey. But I would say read a lot, find poems and poets that you resonate with, and publish the book that you want to publish. And there is room for that. It's a really exciting time. I read in poets.org a poem titled Main Na Bhulunga by Fatima Asghar. And I would have never thought that that would be possible in 2001 when I first came to America. That's a song from a Bollywood title that is such a beautiful poem about their parents' love story. And to Surabhi, who is smiling, and other people who know the song, it means so much. But when you read the poem, you don't have to know the song. You know that it's a love story, and you will know the feeling. And it is a wonderful thing that there is a room for everyone, and there is a room for a Bollywood title in poets.org. It's like I would never think that I would see the day. I have seen poems about Gulmohar tree published in very prestigious and indie journals. So write the book that you exactly want to write, and you will find a press for it. But first, build a publication history. I have so many favorite poets that it's hard to name a few, but I really, really, really like Ilya Kaminsky, the Ukrainian American poet. His book Deaf Republic has been life-changing for me. Someday I want to write a book that is kind of like a play, and it talks about how sounds have a meaning for the hearing and how they mean a different thing to the deaf poet, and about how violence has a different meaning, violence without sound, how that affected the poet. And I highly recommend it. Mary Oliver, I really love the simplicity but the layers of meaning in her poems. And there is one poem that I've never found a home for, but I think it's one of my best poets. And I wrote it after I read Blue Horse by Mary Oliver, and her poems just stay with me. And there are so many poets but I would like to name those two today, and Fatima Asghar, and so many contemporary poets.
All right. I don't see any other questions in the chat right now. So thank you so much, Anuja, and all of you guys for being here today to listen to her. If you want a recording, please reach out to me. If you're registered for the program, you will get it along with your thank you email, with her personal email, so you can reach out to her in case you still want to be in touch with her. Um, I am taking a break from Writers Beyond Borders for an indefinite break. I will be back soon with more programming, but for now, I don't have anything scheduled at the moment. But if you're on my mailing list, you'll get to know when I'm back. So thank you, everybody. Have a good day. Thank you, Anuja.
Thank you so much.